So while I'm in the vein of delivering lectures on how to dog, so to speak, I was laying on the couch after training the dogs and had the thought that I should dive into when one uses a clicker versus a marker word and why. Under the umbrella of the entity that we know as positive reinforcement training, you will run into folks who either use a physical clicker or a marker word like yes to indicate to their dog that the thing that they did is correct. In order to understand positive reinforcement training, at a very fundamental level, you need to understand there are two fundamental building blocks: a primary reinforcer and the secondary reinforcer. You're using a secondary reinforcer to mark a behavior and inform the dog that the primary reinforcer is coming. That is to say, in the typical sequence that we see of tell a dog to sit, click or say yes, and then give the dog food, what's happening there is that the click informs the dog that the action of sitting precipitates the arrival of food. Because the dog has been conditioned that that click or word always precipitates the arrival of food, and thus we can use it to shape a behavior from a very general idea down to something complicated and specific by creating building blocks. So, if we have a primary and a secondary reinforcer, we have a few options in our secondary reinforcer, and the typical ones are the clicker versus the word. And I thought I might dive into why one you would use or choose one over the other. I've used both at times. Shiner is 8.5 years old, and so at various times I have used both with him, and so he is pretty equally conditioned to using a clicker and a marker word. The reasoning behind one versus the other: most recently I've been using marker words, but I'm kind of transitioning back to the clicker. The word, which mine is yes. Dog sits, I say yes. I always have it with me. It isn't dependent on me having a physical object in my hand, and that is also a point. It is hands-free. That is very valuable, especially with a pretty active and boisterous puppy. However, the clicker, when those two advantages are taken into account, is still in almost every regard a superior tool. And there's a lot of reasons why. For one, it is a far more distinct sound as compares to the overwhelming amount of background noise that a dog will hear at any given time, even in a quiet room. They tend to learn faster because they can pick the sound out better out of everything that's happening while you're training: the jingling of their tags, food rustling around, you speaking, saying, sit versus down versus all of this. Yes can kind of blur into that, and the click serves as a very distinct sound that tells the dog they were right and that we can move on to the next rep. It does require having it with you and more coordination. This has to become as simultaneous as it can be with the behavior that you're trying to shape towards. There are lots of designs available, from the classic box clicker, which is a small plastic box with a metal tab in it that you depress with your thumb, to ones that have buttons and all manner of ways of making that clicking noise happen. The ones that I use tend to be a little bit quieter, but they have a button on them, and so you can flip it around and use it in your hand backwards, you can click it between your knees, etc. But there's a lot of reasons to use any one or the other, and it's important to try a few to see which one fits with your vibe best. The advantages of using a primary and a secondary reinforcer is that they condition the dog to be operant, which is to say, try and figure out what you want. And additionally, this form of teaching avoids penalizing incorrect tries. So the dog isn't afraid or penalized for trying new things and getting it maybe wrong. They're more willing to come back and try again. So that brief lecture encapsulates, I think, the discussion that is there to be had about why one might choose to use a clicker versus a marker word, and how maybe using both can have its advantages. So thank you for jumping in on this brief video. I hope it helps. If you need dog training or are interested in some outdoors dog gear, hit me up at the website, and I hope to see you around next time.